The signal came through at 3 in the morning, ship time. Commander Daniel Harper was asleep in his quarters when the alarm pulled him from dreams he would not remember. He dressed quickly and walked the bridge of the USS Defiance, his boots echoing in the empty corridors. Lieutenant Katie Vance was already there, her face lit by the glow of the main screen. She looked up as he entered. "It's from HFY Prime, sir." The Valorians. Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. He knew that name. Every human who had lived through the dark years knew that name. 20 years ago, when Earth was burning and humanity was scattered across the stars like dust, the Valorians had opened their doors. They had taken in refugees by the thousands. They had shared their food, their medicine, their homes. They had asked for nothing in return. "Put it through," Daniel said. The screen flickered, and then a face appeared. It was High Matriarch Sylveth, leader of the Valorian people. Daniel had seen images of her before. She was tall and elegant, with feathers of deep blue and silver that crowned her head like a headdress. But the creature on the screen looked nothing like those images. Her feathers were dull and broken. Her eyes, usually bright with wisdom, were hollow with fear. "This message goes to any who can hear," she said. Her voice was thin and tired. "The Draken swarm has reached our world. Our defenses have fallen. The Galactic Council has refused our request for aid. They say we are too far from strategic resources. They say the risk is too great." She paused, and Daniel saw her hands trembling. "I am not asking for an army. I am asking for anyone. Please, my people are dying." The message ended. The bridge was silent. Katie looked at Daniel. "Sir, the Galactic Council has already made their decision. If we go against their orders. We go alone." Daniel did not answer right away. He was thinking about a story his grandmother had told him when he was a boy. She had been one of the refugees. She had been sick and starving when the Valorian ships found her floating in a broken transport. They had carried her to their world and nursed her back to health. She had lived there for 3 years before humanity rebuilt enough to bring their people home. "They saved us," his grandmother had said, "when no one else would even look at us. They saved us." Daniel turned to Katie. "How many crew do we have?" 312, sir." "And how many Draken ships are attacking HFY Prime?" Katie checked the data from the distress signal. "Estimates say at least 40 capital ships. Hundreds of smaller craft. So we're outnumbered." "By a lot, sir." Daniel nodded. He walked to the center of the bridge and looked at the stars on the main screen. Somewhere out there, a species that had shown humanity kindness was being destroyed, and the galaxy had decided they were not worth saving. "Give me a channel to the whole ship," he said. Katie hesitated for just a moment, then opened the channel. A soft tone sounded throughout the Defiance, waking every soul on board. "This is Commander Harper," Daniel said. "I know it's late, and I know you're tired, but I need you to listen. We've received a distress call from HFY Prime. The Valorians are under attack. The Galactic Council has abandoned them. They say the Valorians aren't worth the risk." He paused. 20 years ago, when Earth was gone and we had nothing, the Valorians didn't ask if we were worth the risk. They just helped. They didn't ask what we could give them. They didn't ask for payment. They saw people in trouble and they acted. He took a breath. "I'm not going to order anyone to come with me. This isn't a sanctioned mission. If we go against orders. We go alone, and we might not come back. But I'm going because I remember what they did for us, and I think we owe them the same." He closed the channel and waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Katie Vance stood up from her station and walked to stand beside him. "I'm with you, sir." One by one, the crew of the Defiance made their choice. Chief Engineer Ryan Cole called up from the engine room. "Engines are ready when you are, Commander." Dr. Megan Torres checked in from the medical bay. "I've got supplies for Valorian physiology. I studied their biology during my training." Sergeant Tony Reeves reported from the armory. "Weapons are loaded, sir. My team is ready." Within an hour, Every single member of the crew had reported in. Not one person had refused. Daniel felt something warm in his chest. Something he had not felt in a long time. Pride, not in himself, but in the people around him, in what humanity could be when it chose to be. Kitty, he said, set a course for Cathay Prime. Maximum speed. Yes, sir. She entered the coordinates. The stars on the screen began to shift as the ship turned toward its destination. Daniel sat down in the command chair. He knew what they were flying into. He knew the odds were bad. He knew that the Galactic Council would be angry, that there might be consequences if they survived. But he also knew something else. He knew that some things mattered more than orders. Some things mattered more than safety. Some things mattered more than living. They didn't ask if saving us was convenient, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Neither will we. The Defiance jumped to hyperspace, a single human ship racing toward a dying world. Behind them, the stars continued to turn, indifferent to the courage of small creatures in the vast darkness. But the crew of the Defiance did not need the stars to notice. They did not need the galaxy to approve. They only needed to know that somewhere, someone needed help. And that was enough. High Matriarch Sylvester stood in her command center, watching the skies burn. The Draken ships were everywhere, dark shapes against the orange glow of her dying world. She had sent her message hours ago. She had not expected anyone to answer. The galaxy had made its choice. Her people would die alone. She was preparing to give the order to evacuate the last of the civilians when one of her officers called out, "Matriarch, a ship has just exited hyperspace." She turned to the screen. A single vessel hung in the darkness, small against a massive Draken fleet. It was a human ship. She recognized the design from the old days, from when the humans had first come to her world as refugees. A transmission came through. A human voice, calm and steady. "Hi, Matriarch Sylveth. This is Commander Daniel Harper of the USS Defiance. We receive your message." Sylveth felt her breath catch in her throat. "Commander, you should not have come. There is only one of you. There are hundreds of them." There was a pause on the other end. Then Daniel Harper spoke again, and his words would be remembered on Cathay Prime for generations. "We're here, Matriarch. That's all that matters." The Defiance dove into battle, like a bird flying into a storm. All around them, Draken ships filled the sky, their hulls black and twisted like the shells of dead insects. They moved without pattern or formation, swarming toward the planet below, hungry for destruction. Commander Daniel Harper gripped the arms of his chair as the ship shook from enemy fire. "Kitty, get us between the Draken and the civilian sectors. Ryan, I need everything you got on the shields." Lieutenant Katie Vance worked the controls with steady hands. The Defiance banked hard, cutting through the chaos toward the largest group of fleeing Valorian transports. Behind them, 3 Draken fighters gave chase, their weapons lighting up the darkness. "Shields at 80%. Ryan Cole reported from engineering. "But they won't hold forever, Commander." "They don't need to hold forever," Daniel said. "They just need to hold long enough." The Defiance opened fire. The ship's guns tore into the first Draken fighter, breaking it apart in a flash of light. The second fighter tried to turn away, but Katie was faster. She brought the ship around and caught it broadside. The third fighter escaped, but only because a dozen more were already taking its place. On the surface of Cathay Prime, High Matriarch Sylveth watched the battle on her screens. She could not believe what she was seeing. One ship, one small human ship, dancing between the Draken swarm, drawing fire away from her people's transports. It was impossible. It was beautiful. "Send word to all civilian shelters," she ordered. "Tell them to begin evacuation. The humans have bought us time. We must not waste it." The evacuation began. Thousands of Valorians emerged from underground shelters and made their way toward the transport zones. The Draken saw them moving and turned their attention to the ground. Assault craft descended from the larger ships, carrying soldiers that looked like nightmares made of bone and metal. Sergeant Tony Reeves led the first team of human soldiers to the surface. They came down in drop pods, landing in the middle of a Valorian city that had been burning for hours. The streets were filled with smoke and screaming. Tony found a group of Valorians trapped in a collapsed building. An elderly male was trying to dig through the rubble with his bare hands, his feathers gray with age and ash. "Step back," Tony said. "We've got this." He and his team used their equipment to clear the debris. They pulled out 12 Valorians, including 4 children who were too scared to make any sound. One of the children looked at Tony with wide eyes. The human soldier was covered in dust and sweat, and blood was running down his arm from a wound he had not noticed. "Why did you come?" the child asked. Tony picked up the child and handed her to her mother. "Because you needed someone," he said. "And we remember what that feels like." In the medical bay of the Defiance, Dr. Megan Torres was working without rest. The wounded came in waves, both human and Valorian. She had studied Valorian medicine during her training, but nothing could have prepared her for this. The injuries were terrible. Some of the patients would not survive. But she kept working. She stitched wounds and set broken bones. She held the hands of the dying and whispered words of comfort. When a young Valorian officer asked why a human doctor was risking her life for strangers, Megan just shook her head. "You're not strangers," she said. "Not anymore." The battle in space grew more desperate by the hour. The Defiance was taking heavy damage. One of the main gun batteries had been destroyed. A section of the hull had been breached, and the crew had to seal off 3 compartments. 22 humans had already died, but they kept fighting. Daniel Harper stood on his bridge, watching the chaos around him. He could see the Valorian transports making their way to safety one by one. Each ship that escaped was 1,000 lives saved. Each minute they bought was precious. "Commander," Katie said, "the Draken flagship is entering the atmosphere. It's heading for the capital." Daniel looked at the screen. The flagship was massive, a living mountain of metal and flesh. It moved slowly, but nothing could stop it. If it reached the capital, the evacuation would end. Millions of Valorians would die. "Can we intercept it?" Daniel asked. Katie ran the numbers. "We don't have the firepower to destroy it, sir. We'd need 10 ships like us, maybe more." Daniel was silent for a moment. He thought about his grandmother, about the stories she had told him. He thought about the Valorians who had taken her in when she had nothing. He thought about the child who had asked Tony Reeves why they came. "Get me a channel to the flagship," he said. Katie looked at him in surprise, but she did as he asked. A moment later, a voice came through the speakers. It was not a voice that was meant to speak to humans. It was cold and hungry, like the sound of bones breaking. "Human vessel," the voice said, "you are of no importance. Stand aside or be consumed." Daniel leaned forward. "This is Commander Daniel Harper of the USS Defiance. I'm giving you one chance to turn around. Leave the system and leave these people alone." There was silence on the channel. Then, something that might have been laughter. "You threaten us? You are one ship. We are many. Your species is small and weak. You will be forgotten." Daniel smiled, though there was no humor in it. "Maybe, but the Valorians won't forget. And neither will anyone who's watching. You want to consume this world? Fine, but you'll have to go through us first. And I promise you we'll make it hurt." He cut the channel. Katie stared at him. "Sir, that was either the bravest thing I've ever heard or the stupidest." "Probably both," Daniel admitted. "Now get us between that flagship and the capital. We're going to buy as much time as we can." The Defiance turned toward the descending monster. It was a tiny thing, a spark against the darkness. But it did not run. It did not hide. It flew straight into the fire, because that was where it was needed, on the surface. The evacuation continued. Valorians looked up at the sky and saw the human ship fighting alone against impossible odds. They saw the flash of weapons and the glow of shields. They saw courage given form. An old Valorian priest watched from a temple that had stood for 1,000 years. His feathers were white with age, and he had seen many things in his long life. But He had never seen anything like this. "Who are these humans?" a young acolyte asked him. The priest was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice soft with wonder. "They are the ones who came when no one else would," he said. "They are the ones who stood where others fled. Remember this day, child. Remember what they did for us. And remember that kindness once given is never truly lost." Above them, the Defiance fought on. The Defiance was dying. Everyone on board knew it. The shields were failing. The engines were damaged. Half the weapons were gone. The ship that had arrived at Kethere Prime as a symbol of hope was now held together by little more than determination and desperate repairs. Commander Daniel Harper stood on his bridge and watched the Draken flagship descend toward the capital city. It moved like a living thing, slow and terrible, its hull covered in patterns that seemed to shift and breathe. Nothing they had thrown at it had even slowed it down. Shields at 12%. Ryan Cole reported from engineering. His voice was tired. He had not slept in 2 days. "Commander, one more direct hit and we're done." Daniel nodded. He had known this moment would come. He had hoped they would have more time, but hope was not a strategy. "How many transports have escaped?" he asked. Katie Vance checked her screens. 63. "That's about 400,000 Valorians, sir. But there's still more on the surface. If that flagship reaches the capital..." She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Daniel looked at the flagship on his screen. It was almost beautiful in its horror, a mountain of death floating through the sky. Behind it, the Draken fleet was regrouping. They could smell victory. They could taste the end. "We need to stop that ship," Daniel said quietly. "Whatever it takes." Katie was silent for a moment. Then she stood up from her station and walked to stand beside him. "I've been thinking about that, sir. We have enough antimatter left in our reserves to create an explosion big enough to destroy the flagship's core. If we pilot a shuttle directly into its main reactor..." She did not finish that sentence either. She did not need to. Daniel looked at her. He saw in her eyes that she was ready. She was offering to die so that others might live. It was the kind of courage that made him proud to serve with her. "Katie," he began. But before he could say anything more, a voice came from behind them. "I'll do it." They turned. Standing at the entrance to the bridge was Ensign Chris Malone. He was 22 years old, fresh out of the academy. He had been on the Defiance for only 6 months. He had a round face and brown hair that never seemed to stay in place, and he looked like someone's kid brother, not a soldier. "Ensign," Daniel said, "this is not something I would ask of anyone, and certainly not someone as young as you." Chris walked forward. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. "You told me something on my first day. Commander, you said that being human means showing up when it matters. You said that the galaxy might not always understand us, but that didn't matter. What mattered was doing what was right." He stopped in front of Daniel and looked him in the eye. "This is me showing up, sir. Let me do this." Daniel felt something break inside him. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to order Chris to stand down, to find another way. But there was no other way. They all knew it. "Ensign," Daniel said, and his voice was rough. "Chris, are you sure?" Chris smiled. It was a small smile, sad and brave at the same time. "I'm sure, sir. I'm scared, but I'm sure." Katie stepped forward. Her eyes were wet, but she did not let the tears fall. "I'll prep the shuttle. Ryan, load the antimatter charges." The next few minutes passed in a blur. The shuttle was prepared. The antimatter was loaded. Chris Malone put on his flight suit and walked to the hangar bay. The crew lined the corridors to watch him pass. Some of them reached out to touch his shoulder. Some of them said his name. One woman, a young engineer named Lisa, hugged him and whispered something in his ear that no one else could hear. Chris climbed into the shuttle. He closed the hatch and started the engines. His hands had stopped shaking. "Ensign Malone," Daniel's voice came through the comm. "You have permission to launch." "Thank you, sir," Chris said, "for everything." The shuttle bay doors opened, and Chris flew out into the burning sky. The Draken saw him coming. They tried to shoot him down, but he was too fast and too small. He weaved through their fire like a leaf in a storm, his eyes fixed on the flagship ahead. It filled his entire view, a wall of darkness and death. "Ensign," Daniel said over the comm, "the flagship's core is located in the lower section. You'll need to breach the outer hull and fly directly into the reactor chamber." "Understood, Commander." Chris pushed the shuttle faster. The flagship grew larger and larger. He could see the patterns on its hull now, strange shapes that seemed to move and watch. He could feel the cold coming from it, even through the walls of his shuttle. He thought about his mother. She was back on Earth, probably sleeping at this hour. She did not know where he was. She did not know what he was about to do. He hoped someone would tell her that he was not afraid. He hoped she would be proud. "Commander," Chris said, "tell my mom I wasn't scared." Daniel's voice came back, thick with emotion. "I will, Chris. I promise." Chris closed his eyes for just a moment. Then he opened them and flew straight into the heart of the monster. The shuttle hit the flagship's hull and kept going. It tore through metal and flesh and things that had no name. It reached the reactor chamber, a pulsing mass of alien energy at the center of the ship. And then the antimatter ignited. The explosion was brighter than a star. It tore the flagship apart from the inside, breaking it into 1,000 pieces that rained down like burning meteors. The Draken fleet scattered in confusion. Their leader was gone. Their symbol of power was destroyed by a single human in a tiny shuttle. On the bridge of the Defiance, no one spoke. They watched the flagship die and knew what it cost. Daniel Harper sat down in his command chair. He felt older than he had ever felt. 47 of his crew were dead now. 47 humans who had come to save strangers and given everything. "Sir," Katie said softly, "the Draken are retreating." Daniel nodded. He should have felt triumph. They had won. The Valorians were saved. But all he could think about was a young man with messy brown hair who had smiled at death and flown into the darkness. "Begin recovery operations," he said. "And, Katie, make sure we find something of Chris. Something we can send home." Katie wiped her eyes. "Yes, sir." On the surface of Ketare Prime, High Matriarch Sylveth watched the remains of the flagship fall from the sky. Her people were crying and cheering and holding each other. They had been saved. Against all odds, they had been saved. She thought about the young human who had destroyed the flagship. She did not know his name yet, but she would learn it, and she would make sure that her people never forgot it. "One human," she said softly. "One small human, and it changed everything." The fires were still burning across her world. There was so much work to do, so much to rebuild, but for the first time in days, she felt something she had thought was lost forever. She felt hope. The news spread faster than light. Within hours, every corner of the galaxy knew what had happened at Ketare Prime. They knew that the Galactic Council had abandoned the Valorians. They knew that a single human ship had answered the call. They knew about the battle, the sacrifice, and the young man who had destroyed the Draken flagship. His name was Chris Malone. He was 22 years old. He had been in space for less than a year, and he had saved millions of lives. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Representatives from 100 species gathered in the Great Hall on the station known as Crossroads. They came to discuss what had happened, to assign blame, to protect their own interests. But the mood in the hall was different than it had been before. Ambassador Crethanael of the Thresson Union was the first to speak. He was a large creature with gray skin and for arms, known for his careful words and cautious diplomacy. But today his voice was sharp. "We were contacted by the Valorians," he said. "They asked for our help. We refused. We told ourselves that they were too far away, that the risk was too great, that it was not our problem." He paused and looked around the hall. And then the humans came. 300 of them in one ship against an entire fleet. They did not ask for permission. They did not wait for a vote. They simply acted. He turned to the human delegation. where Commander Daniel Harper sat in his dress uniform. The commander looked tired. He had not slept properly since the battle. "Tell me, Commander," Crethanael said, "why did you come? What did you hope to gain?" Daniel stood up. Every eye in the hall was on him. He thought about all the things he could say, all the political answers he could give. Then he decided to simply tell the truth. "We came because the Valorians helped us once," he said. 20 years ago, when Earth was destroyed and my people had nothing, they took us in. They fed us and healed us and gave us hope. I was taught that when someone helps you, you remember, and when they need you, you help them back." The hall was silent. "We did not come for power," Daniel continued. "We did not come for resources or political advantage. We came because it was right, because someone needed help, because that is what humans do." He sat down. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, High Matriarch Sylveth rose from her seat. She had traveled across the galaxy to attend this session. Her feathers had begun to regain their color, but her eyes still carried the weight of everything she had seen. "The Galactic Council abandoned my people," she said. "You calculated the costs and decided we were not worth saving. But the humans did not calculate. They did not measure our worth in resources or strategic value. They measured it in something else entirely." She looked at Daniel. "Commander Harper, Ensign Malone, the crew of the Defiance. They did not ask what we could offer. They asked only one question: do you need us?" She turned back to the council. "I have spent my life in politics. I have learned to speak in careful words and hidden meanings. But today I will speak plainly. The humans have shown us what it means to be civilized, not in technology or power, but in compassion, in courage, in the simple act of standing with those who have no one else." She walked to the center of the hall. Her voice grew stronger. "To fight alongside humanity is not simply a tactical advantage," she said. "It is to be celebrated. It is to be esteemed beyond worlds. For they do not count the cost. They do not weigh the odds. They see someone in trouble and they act. That is who they are. That is what they have shown us. And I, for one, will never forget it." The hall erupted in noise. Some delegates were shouting in anger, defending their decisions. But more were quiet, looking at the human delegation with new eyes. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The Valorians built a monument in their capital city. It was a simple thing, a statue of a human hand reaching upward, holding a single Valorian feather. At the base was a plaque with the names of the 47 humans who had died at Cathay Prime. Chris Malone's name was at the top. Other species began to reach out to humanity. The Kelmari, an ancient race of miners who had always kept to themselves, sent a message to Earth. They wanted to form an alliance, not for trade or military support, but simply because they had seen what humans would do for strangers. The Thresson Union followed. Then the Velith Collective. Then a dozen others. Species that had ignored humanity for generations now sought their friendship. High Matriarch Sylveth traveled to Earth herself. She was greeted by millions of humans who lined the streets to see her. She spoke before the United Human Assembly. Her words broadcast to every world that would listen. "I came to say thank you," she began. "But that seems too small. How do you thank someone who gave everything? How do you repay a debt that cannot be measured?" She paused, gathering herself. "The answer is that you cannot. But you can remember. You can tell the story. You can make sure that every child on every world knows what happened at Cathay Prime. You can make sure that the name Chris Malone is spoken with reverence for 1,000 years." Her voice softened. "And you can try to be worthy of their sacrifice. You can try to be the kind of people who would do the same. Because that is what the humans have taught us. That is what they have shown us. That kindness is not weakness. That compassion is not foolishness. That standing with those who need you is the highest form of strength." She stepped back from the podium and bowed her head. "Thank you, humans. Thank you for showing us who you are. And thank you for reminding us who we could be." The assembly hall was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the applause began. It grew and grew until it filled the entire building. It spread to the crowds outside, and then to the broadcast, and then to every world that was watching. On a small colony at the edge of human space, an old woman named Carol Malone sat in her living room and watched the speech. She had received the news about her son 3 weeks ago. She had cried until she had no tears left. But now, watching the Valorian leader speak his name, she felt something new. Pride. Terrible, heartbreaking pride. Her boy had changed the galaxy. Her boy had shown them all what humanity could be. And no matter how much it hurt, no matter how much she missed him, she knew that he had made the right choice. "That's my son," she whispered to the empty room. "That's my Chris." And across the stars, the name Chris Malone became something more than a name. It became a promise, a reminder, a light in the darkness that would never go out. 5 years had passed since the Battle of Cathay Prime. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted, and at the center of that change stood humanity, a species that had once been overlooked and underestimated, now respected across 1,000 worlds. Admiral Daniel Harper stood on the observation deck of Crossroads Station, looking out at the stars. His hair had turned gray at the temples, and new lines marked his face. The weight of command had aged him, but his eyes were still sharp, still kind. Behind him, a door opened and closed. "Admiral," a familiar voice said, "the ceremony is about to begin." He turned to see Captain Katie Vance walking toward him. She wore the uniform of a starship commander now, 3 gold bars on her collar that she had earned through years of service. The woman who had once questioned his decision to go to Cathay Prime had become one of the finest officers in the fleet. "I was just thinking," Daniel said. "About Chris?" "About all of them. All 47. He paused. "Do you think they would be proud of what we've built?" Katie stood beside him and looked out at the stars. Beyond the station, ships from a dozen species moved through space. Human vessels flew alongside Valorian cruisers and Kelmari freighters. A Thresson transport docked at the station arm, unloading supplies for worlds it had never traded with before. "I think they would be amazed," she said. "I think they would look at all of this and wonder how it happened." Daniel nodded. "Sometimes I wonder, too." The Galactic Council had changed. Humanity now held a permanent seat, not because they had demanded it, but because other species had insisted. The Valorians had been the first to propose it. The Kelmari had seconded. The vote had been nearly unanimous. More importantly, the Council itself had changed. The old way of thinking, the careful calculations of risk and reward, had given way to something new. When a crisis arose now, the Council did not ask whether it was convenient to help. They asked whether help was needed. It was a small shift, but it had made all the difference. "The USS Malone is ready for launch," Katie said. "Are you going to say a few words?" Daniel smiled. The USS Malone, a new ship, the finest in the fleet, named after a young man who had been in space for less than a year. Chris would have laughed at that. He would have said it was too much, that he did not deserve it. But he did deserve it. They all did. "Let's go," Daniel said. The ceremony was held in the main hangar bay. Thousands of people had gathered to watch. Humans and Valorians and Kelmari and Thressons. Representatives from species that had once ignored each other now stood side by side. High Matriarch Sylveth was there, her feathers bright with the colors of ceremony. She had aged too, but gracefully. The bond between her people and humanity had grown stronger with each passing year. Valorian students studied at human universities. Human doctors trained at Valorian medical centers. The two species had become family in all the ways that mattered. Daniel walked to the podium. Behind him, the USS Malone rested in its cradle, sleek and powerful and new. 5 years ago, he began, we received a distress call. A species that had once helped us was in danger. The galaxy had decided they were not worth saving. He paused. We disagreed. He looked out at the crowd. I will not pretend that what we did was easy. 47 of my crew gave their lives. Good people, brave people, people with families who loved them and futures that would never come. His voice caught for just a moment. But they knew what they were fighting for. They knew that some things matter more than safety, more than orders, more than living. He gestured to the ship behind him. This vessel is named for Ensign Chris Malone. He was 22 years old when he flew a shuttle into the heart of a Draken flagship. He was scared. He told me so himself. But he went anyway, because he understood something that I hope we all understand now. Daniel's voice grew stronger. Being human does not mean being the strongest or the smartest. It does not mean having the best technology or the biggest fleet. It means showing up when someone needs you. It means standing with those who have no one else. It means believing that every life has value, regardless of species or distance or convenience. He looked at Sylveth. She nodded slowly, her eyes bright with emotion. The Valorians taught us this lesson 20 years ago, when they took in our refugees. We tried to repay that kindness at Cathare Prime. And now, together, we are teaching the galaxy. We are showing them that the old way of thinking, the way of isolation and calculation, is not the only way. There's another path, a better path, a path that leads not to power, but to something more valuable. He smiled. It leads to trust, to friendship, to a galaxy where no one faces the darkness alone. The crowd began to applaud. Daniel stepped back on the podium and watched as the USS Malone came to life. Its engines glowed blue. Its lights flickered on. A new ship, ready for a new mission. Captain Katie Vance walked toward the vessel. Her crew was waiting for her, 300 humans, and a handful of Valorian officers who had asked to serve aboard. The first truly mixed crew in the fleet. Before she boarded, she turned back to Daniel. "Where are we headed, Admiral?" "The Kelmari mining colony at Vest Point," he said. "There's a collapsing star threatening their settlements. They've asked for help." Katie nodded. She remembered those words from long ago, the ones Daniel had spoken as they prepared to jump to Cathare Prime. "They didn't ask if saving us was convenient," she said. "Neither will we." Daniel smiled. "Go show them who we are, Captain." Katie saluted and boarded the ship. The hangar bay cleared. The Malone rose from its cradle and glided toward the exit, its hull gleaming in the station lights. Daniel watched it go. He thought about Chris Malone, somewhere out there among the stars. He thought about the crew of the Defiance, the ones who had given everything. He thought about his grandmother, who had told him stories of Valorian kindness when he was just a boy. The USS Malone reached the edge of the station. For a moment, it hung there, a bright point of light against the endless darkness. Then its engines flared, and it jumped into hyperspace, racing toward another crisis, another chance to make a difference. Daniel Harper turned away from the window and walked back into the station. There was work to do. There was always work to do. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful, not because the galaxy was safe. It was not. It would never be. But because humanity had found its place among the stars, not through conquest or domination, but through something simpler, something stronger, through the simple act of showing up when someone needed them. And that, Daniel thought, was worth everything.